It's Sunday, December 14th, 1980. We have got a barn burner for the ages for you at Metropolitan Stadium, and we are going to bring you there momentarily. There are first two principal actors you need to meet. One is Tommy Kramer. Three of his older brothers were college football quarterbacks, but he's the first one to make it to the NFL. In 1977, the Vikings used a first-round pick on a quarterback for the first time ever, and they spent it on Kramer, who they saw as the heir apparent to the aging Fran Tarkenton. Compared to Tark, Kramer is much more of a pocket passer and deep ball specialist, and has already engineered so many late Vikings comebacks that he'll soon earn the nickname 2-Minute Tommy. Coach Bud Grant, while a big fan, would clearly find 58-Minute Tommy a little bit less stressful. The other principal actor is wide receiver Ahmad Rashad, Kramer's favorite target, who's finishing off his second straight 1,000-yard season. Rashad will later endear himself to a new audience of sports fans as the host of NBA Inside Stuff. And as part of a related promotional stunt, he'll actually suit up for the Sixers in a preseason game. Technically then, he is believed to be one of just two people in history to play in both the NBA and NFL. In what has to be one of the all-time most fun sports coincidences, the other is his coach. Ahmad and Bud will be friends for life. Early in his career, the former Bobby Moore changed his name to Ahmad Rashad after converting to Islam, and he caught hell everywhere he went for doing that. The first time his new name was announced over the PA system in St. Louis, his own team's fans drowned it out with boos. He was cast out by his teammates at practice, so he looked for a new team in Washington. "Hello, Bobby," they told him. Then he went to Seattle. "Hello, Bobby," they told him. With Rashad's career seemingly on the outs due to a worrisome knee injury, Bud Grant traded for him anyway. Bud didn't call him Ahmad, he called him Ahmad, using the traditional pronunciation of the name. It was here in Minnesota that Rashad, for the first time in his career, found a culture that welcomed him, regardless of what his name was or which religion he practiced. Today, Rashad calls Grant one of the most important people in his life. And on this Sunday afternoon in 1980, Kramer and Rashad will engineer a play so unforgettable that more than 40 years later, Rashad will reenact it on the exact same geographical location. Trouble is, this location will eventually sit smack in the middle of the Mall of America, and the site of the play is now occupied by a flume ride, so this is not exactly how it went, but in the retelling of history, sometimes factual compromises need to be made.
The Vikings enter the 15th and penultimate week of the regular season holding a one-game lead in the NFC Central over the Detroit Lions, and they can clinch the division with a win or a Lions loss. But there's reason for their fans to be nervous. Their remaining two games are against the very good, playoff-bound Cleveland Browns and Houston Oilers, while the Lions' two remaining games are against the very bad Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Green Bay Packers. The Browns have won 10 of their last 12 games, and led by MVP quarterback Brian Sipe, they've come out firing. Sipes put touchdowns on the board with both his arm on a pass to Calvin Hill, and his legs as Cleveland races in front 13-0 at the half. Minnesota gets on the board in the third quarter when Joe Sensor takes a screen pass from Kramer and gets some nice blocking that springs him 31 yards for the score, but midway through the fourth, a Cleo Miller 1-yard touchdown puts the Browns up 14. It's a two-score game, but with a little over 7 minutes on the clock, there's enough time if the Vikings can respond with a touchdown. And after a beautiful pass from Kramer to Sammy White moves the ball to Cleveland's 7-yard line, Ted Brown indeed caps a quick 2-minute drive with a touchdown. 5 minutes remain, and now it stays a two-score game after a high snap leads to their second failed extra point try of the game. Despite swiftly moving downfield for a TD, they're arguably in worse shape than they were a couple minutes ago since they still need 2 scores and now don't even have the ball. But on a second down with a little over 2 minutes to go, instead of running to drain the clock to the 2-minute warning or force Minnesota to burn a timeout, Sipe passes against a Viking blitz and Bobby Bryant makes the Browns pay dearly for that gamble. Needing to strike quickly, Ahmad Rashad, who's basically playing on one leg after an injury prevented him from practicing all week and left his status to even suit up today in doubt, hauls in a pass to move the Vikes into the red zone. After they pick up another 7 yards, Kramer hits an open Rashad in the end zone for the score with a minute and a half left. Of course, in the wake of those missed extra points, they still trail, so to have a realistic shot, Minnesota needs to recover the ensuing onside kick. They do not. That officially renders their only chance of winning coming in the form of some sort of miracle. Even when the defense forces a 3 and out, only 14 seconds remain when they take over at their own 20, still a good 50 yards away from attempting even a low percentage field goal. Kramer's first pass in desperation mode is complete to Joe Sensor. Sensor then perfectly executes the hook and ladder to Ted Brown, who rumbles into Cleveland territory before stopping the clock with enough time left for just one more snap. While the play worked beautifully in picking up 36 yards, especially for having been designed on the fly moments before, they're still shy of field goal range and must score a touchdown from 46 yards out on this last play. Kramer drops back and heaves the football as far as he can toward the right sideline. The ball begins to lose steam and is dropping short of the end zone. Awaiting its descent is a large cluster of Browns and Vikings. Cleveland safety Tom Darden leaps among the crowd and tips the ball up. Ahmad Rashad, in midair mind you, is able to stick his left arm out, grab the ball, pin it against his hip at the 1 yard line, and back in for the most dramatic division-clinching win in NFL history.
You're kidding! The Vikings, they win it! Time is run out! Minnesota, they are the champions!
For the 11th time, the Minnesota Vikings are headed to the playoffs, and it's in those playoffs that we will see that luck is an inexhaustible resource. There's something you should know about these 1980 Vikings. Their ball security is unreal. Throughout this entire 16-game season, they've lost only 3 fumbles. That's less than 0.2 fumbles per game, the lowest ratio the NFL has ever seen by a wide margin, and the lowest this season by miles. Even in our time, when fumbles have been cut way down, this rate would lead the league in most seasons. 3 weeks after the miracle at the Met, the Vikings visit the heavily favored Eagles in the divisional round. They jump out to a 14-0 advantage, then force a safety in the third quarter to retake the lead. The stage is now set for one of the strangest series of events in the history of American football. I know we say that a lot, that this or that is the best, worst, most, whatever in football history, but just watch. Late in the third, with the Vikings set to receive the punt and try to pad their lead, the ball is caught by a gust of wind. Return man Eddie Payton, brother of Walter Payton, can't get a beat on it, resulting in turnover number 1. Later, he'll blame himself for everything that comes after, but it's not his fault. The football gods have very clearly decided that the Vikings have earned a vacation. The Eagles quickly score to take their first lead of the game, 21-16. Payton atones for his mistake with a long kick return, only for the Eagles to get to Tommy Kramer and force another fumble. The next play, the Eagles fumble the ball back to the Vikings, who hold on to it for a solid couple of minutes before coughing it up a third time. This team, the most fumble-averse team in NFL history to this point, has just doubled its season total in the span of about 5 minutes, and those 5 minutes just had to happen during the second half of a playoff game. It gets weirder. Eagles quarterback Ron Jaworski throws an interception, Kramer immediately responds with an interception of his own on the very next play, and then Jaws throws deep into Minnesota territory and is intercepted. Kramer immediately responds with an interception of his own on the very next play again. This time, Philly hangs on to it long enough to kick a field goal and increase their lead to a 2-score margin, 24-16. With time becoming scarce, Kramer wastes little time in throwing another interception, which the Eagles capitalize on with another touchdown to put the game completely out of reach. You know, it's a real shame. The Vikings were just one turnover shy of making history. Yep, there it is, there we go. These guys have now given away the ball on 7 consecutive possessions. We've searched far and wide, and we have found only one other confirmed instance, the Rams during the 2000 regular season, of any team ever doing this. My God, just look at it. Is there a lesson here? Nope. Whatever, that was just a playoff game. This was a key historical artifact, a demonstration of what is coming and what is going away, both for the Vikings and for the game of football. First, what's coming? Nearly all the games you've seen so far have been very one-sided, haven't they? The Vikings won their first ever game 37-13. Their playoff games were typically decisive, and none of their Super Bowl losses felt particularly close. The miracle of the Met was astonishing and would have gone down in history no matter which decade it was played in, but it's still talked about to this day because those fans of the Met had so rarely seen a quote-unquote great game like that. I'm using quotes there because I've introduced my own somewhat arbitrary definition of what a great game is from a viewer's perspective. This one met all three of my conditions. First, it's decided by a one-score margin, so within 7 points, or 8 once the two-point conversion is introduced in 1994. Second, both teams score at least 20 points. This means more scoring, which is generally more fun, but more importantly, it demonstrates that both teams are very capable of scoring, and the losing team presents a serious challenge to the winning team. And third, someone actually has to win the damn thing, so no ties. It's appropriate that this game occurred at the dawn of the 1980s, because by this definition, there will be nearly 200 more great games in the 80s than there were in the 70s. This is the beginning of a trend that will continue into the 2020s. It has a little to do with the NFL's expansion to include more teams and therefore more games in general, but not a whole lot. It has more to do with new rules implemented to encourage this outcome, like the two-point conversion and better protection for the quarterback, and also increased league-wide parity. We in the 2020s are spoiled. We're likely to see about 5 great games a week, and the miracle at the Met is the instant classic that serves as the gateway to the modern era. The age of optimization is underway, which brings us to the matter of what we lose. Watch the Vikings as they mob Ahmad Rashad after his touchdown. The fans are extremely low and close to the action. If they were any closer, they'd be in the end zone. This is a consequence of Metropolitan Stadium's original purpose as a minor league baseball stadium. They've shoved NFL football in here via a series of expansions, but architecturally it has met its limits. When the place is really rocking like this, the camera can't even keep a steady shot. Since the place was built for baseball, the sightlines are pretty bad for watching football, requiring fans in some spots to crane their necks a full 90 degrees. No one's happy with the seating capacity, the scoreboards, the locker rooms, the press boxes, or really much of anything besides the gigantic parking lot that perfectly accommodates the fans' interests in tailgating and getting drunk off their asses before and after the game. The Met has taken everybody as far as it can. Generally, everybody can agree on that much, but no one can really agree on what to do about it. In 1982, future Senator Amy Klobuchar will write her senior essay on this decade-long odyssey while studying at Yale, and the whole story will turn out to be so sprawling and complex that she ends up publishing it as a book. And oh my god, there were not 2 sides to this debate, there were not 4 or 5 or 6, there were approximately 427. Some wanted a dome to shield players and fans from the Minnesota elements. Some purists argued that it was unnatural to play football indoors and wanted an open-air stadium. Some thought the Vikings should finance it entirely. Others wanted to dump in public money, scared by rumors that the Vikings were entertaining offers to move to Phoenix or New York or Memphis, a move straight out of the sports ownership playbook. One powerful contingent wanted a new stadium in downtown Minneapolis. Another wanted the Vikings to remain in suburban Bloomington to the south, where Metropolitan Stadium was. And that doesn't even begin to outline the endlessness of the political and financial and geographical wrangling. Every proposal that could possibly have been made was made by somebody, and in case you take that as an exaggeration, an eccentric collective of local architects submitted a complete, official, real proposal for a portable stadium that could be deflated, stuffed into semi-trailers, trucked back and forth between Minneapolis and Bloomington, and re-inflated. The end result is inflated, at least. In 1982, by the way, congratulations to the Raiders, winners of Super Bowl 15, and the 49ers, winners of Super Bowl 16. Anyway, in 1982, the Vikings move into the brand new Metrodome in downtown Minneapolis, which they'll share with the Twins. The nylon roof is supported by hot air that's pumped into the building. The Metrodome is nice and new and warm and indoors, and the precise opposite of everything the Vikings have ever known. Bud Grant is a realist. He's always loved coaching in the elements, however brutal they could be, but he realized some time ago that a dome was probably necessary if the Vikings were going to keep pace with a rapidly modernizing NFL. He didn't hesitate to call the Met the worst stadium in all of pro sports. But that cold weather mythos, the one Grant had played into by banning heaters from his sideline, was over. His players had embraced it, not only as a tactic of intimidation, but as a sort of superpower. Was it really? Well, let's look at the Vikings' outdoor no-heater years, 1970 through 81. When the weather was reported to be 32 degrees Fahrenheit or below, so in other words freezing, the Vikings won 29 games, lost 10, tied 1. Above 32, they went 85 and 51 and 1, so that's a winning percentage of 744 versus 625. Pretty significant. Thing is, more than 3/4 of those freezing games, as you might expect, were played at home in Minnesota. Within these same years, NFL teams across the board saw a home winning percentage that was .154 better than on the road, which alone is a larger discrepancy than the Vikings' cold weather discrepancy. And the sample size just isn't large enough to differentiate between a cold weather advantage and a home field advantage. The results don't really indicate a heightened ability to win in the cold. I really wanted to see it, but I just don't. What it did do for the Vikings, though, is produce a myth, a legend, an identity. It was an illusion that inspired a truth. They weren't great because of the cold, but they were great. I think we should allow ourselves some of those legends. We should let them in, we should enjoy them, we should celebrate them. All these years later, Vikings players and fans are intensely proud of those years, of every brutally cold Sunday afternoon they spent out there pounding out every last win. And they absolutely should be. We told you this decade would be a wild one. Well, strap in and get ready for an absolute bombshell of a headline coming out of the Star Tribune in November of 1982. Bud Grant is cleaning out his garage. He's got a lot of work ahead of him. As a legendary head coach, he tends to accumulate tons in the way of awards and gifts that he has no idea what to do with. Decades later, he'll start throwing an annual garage sale that draws big crowds of Vikings fans looking to buy something and get it autographed. He doesn't have much use for worldly possessions, but he does like money. And that's why this time around, when the players go on strike after the expiration of the latest CBA, Grant organizes a coach's strike of his own. The NFL expects him and his fellow coaches to work the extra Hall of Fame preseason game without extra pay, so he says, hey, the players are fighting for their fair pay and we're going to fight for ours. Ultimately, Grant does back down over concerns that the Vikings will be caught in the middle of his dispute with Commissioner Pete Rozelle, who he still seems to resent a little bit for the Super Bowl locker room fiasco in 1974. Regardless, I cannot remember a single other instance of a coach ever even daring to call a strike. In so doing, he struck mortal terror into the hearts of NFL brass. It feels like he just wanted to get in one last shot before the bell. After the strike-shortened 9-game 1982 regular season, a season so upside down that a kicker won the MVP award, the Vikings host the Falcons, another franchise getting ready for a years-long hibernation. This game is as weird as the Falcons are. Atlanta's special teams unit manages to score 3 touchdowns, but its offense scores 0, and Minnesota wins the Metrodome's first ever playoff game 30-24. Congratulations to Washington, winners of Super Bowl 17. This is their first Super Bowl win, and it comes a few weeks after their workhorse running back John Riggins bullies the Vikings all up and down the field in the second round of the playoffs. By the time it's all over, Riggins totals 185 yards on the ground, and the Vikings fall 21-7. The next season, they finish 8-8, and they miss the playoffs for just the 4th time in the last 16 years. Bud Grant sits back and takes stock of things. The glory days of the 1970s are falling out of view. Their record has nearly perfectly formed a plateau, which is actually a commendable achievement. When other teams inevitably hit the crest of their wave, they tend to backslide significantly. All other franchises are in a state of either rising or falling. Despite losing all those Hall of Famers and architects of their Super Bowl runs, the Vikings simply do not fall. Bud has made sure of that. Weeks after the end of the 1983 season, Bud Grant retires. Is he burnt out? No, he enjoys coaching as much as he ever has. Was it a relatively disappointing 8-8 season? Nope, he believes this team has a bright future ahead. Was he quietly forced out by management? Nope. It's pretty clear they would have done whatever it took to keep him on the sideline forever. Has the dome sanitized away the mystique of playing in the cold and broken his heart? No. He'll later say in the clearest possible terms that it has nothing to do with his decision. As always, Bud's reality is a simple one. He and his wife wanted to set aside enough money to see all their kids through college, and now they have, and now a 56-year-old Bud wants to enjoy the company of his family in the great outdoors, and that's it. Bud wasn't necessarily an ingenious play caller. He didn't invent any revolutionary new schemes. Maybe his coaches did, but he gives them credit for that. He wasn't dogmatic about his system because he didn't have any one system. He didn't swing many major personnel moves, save for reacquiring Fran Tarkenton, the quarterback he should have had all along. He didn't make any rousing halftime speeches. He often didn't make any speeches at all. This was a really interesting contrast within Coach Bud Grant. With the little things, lining up for the anthem, keeping haircuts short, making sure everybody wore their socks the same way. Oh yeah, he was conformist as hell, but with the big things, the things that directly amount to success, he was downright radical in his simplicity. Tarkenton and Marshall and Page and Cap were incredibly unorthodox players for their positions, but instead of trying to hammer them out into a shape that conformed to his idea of what they should be, he simply coached around them. He championed the players and the people they already were and capitalized on the abilities they already had. When they went on strike, he stood with them. When they went on strike again, he said, "Hey, good idea, guys. I think I'm going to get a piece of that." His Vikings locker room stood out in the NFL of the 1970s, which was racially integrated in terms of personnel, but rarely in the cultural sense. Bud appointed black players like Jim Marshall as team leaders and treated every last player on his roster with an uncommon level of respect. This is all decidedly bare minimum stuff that Bud is never asked to receive any credit for. It just, as he always loved to say, seemed like the thing to do. Those things did help push the NFL into the future. Many of Bud's other qualities never did. Just because you're a revolutionary doesn't mean others are going to follow in your footsteps, and ultimately, Bud Grant, he's one of one. The modern coaching ranks are rife, almost without exception, with workaholics who sleep in their offices and neurotically obsess over every last blocking assignment. Absolutely nobody else has ever done it like Bud, who was confident and self-assured enough to do his job, make sure everybody else knew theirs, and then just go home. Sometimes he would cut a media obligation short because he needed to go home and feed his dogs. Jim Klobuchar spotted him alone sometimes after team meals, quietly dumping all the leftovers in a bag all by himself because he knew his dogs would appreciate him. And now, after 17 transformational years with the Minnesota Vikings, Bud Grant heads off into the horizon with his beloved dogs in tow, in pursuit of all the animals of the wild. Some he hunts, a holdover practice from his youth when his family had to do so in order to put food on the table, but others he takes in if they're in trouble, like a baby squirrel or a raccoon who's lost a home. Still others he makes friends with. There are even wild ravens out there who he's formed such a close bond with that they actually come to him when called. The only animals he hasn't found very coachable are the seagulls. They're a particularly toxic locker room presence. Bud's still working on them. Congratulations to the now Los Angeles Raiders, winners of Super Bowl 18. This is their third Super Bowl win. Despite not yet having won a Super Bowl, the Minnesota Vikings find themselves in the upper echelon of NFL franchises under the watch of one coach who was allowed a reign lasting nearly 2 decades. General Manager Mike Lynn wants to repeat that formula. He wants Bud Grant's successor to be somebody young, somebody who can lead the Vikings into the 1990s and beyond. Within 48 hours of Bud Grant's resignation, Lynn formally announces his replacement, the 37-year-old Vikings receivers coach, Les Steckel. Steckel is a hot commodity. The University of Minnesota Golden Gophers recently tried desperately to hire him away from the Vikings, only for Steckel to turn him down. The Gophers, unwilling to settle for their second choice, again approached Steckel, offering to give him whatever he wanted. He turned the Gophers down again, leaving him to resort to that second choice, some guy by the name of Lou Holtz, whoever that is. And now, Steckel will be the Vikings' man of the future, the Leif Erikson to Bud Grant's Eric the Red. Remarkably, he'll fill this role while also serving an administrative role in the Marine Corps Reserves. Turns out he served in the Marines and saw combat in Vietnam, recalling that he spent a year living in rice paddies and once led a unit of some 300 soldiers into battle. Wow. Thank you for your service, Les. Steckel explains that he learned discipline from his time in the Marines and that he thrives on discipline, so it's kind of cool that he's coming in with his own distinct philosophy. Prior to the season, the Vikings used their first-round draft selection on defensive tackle Keith Millard, who will eventually have an outstanding career as a 2-time Pro Bowler. Before they can sign him, though, a team from the upstart USFL swoops in and locks him down with a far better offer, and in the wake of this setback, Steckel says, "When I was in Vietnam and the colonel told us to take the hill, we'd lose some guys, but by God, we'd take the hill." I guess that's the Marine coming out again, huh? Well, thank you for your service. In years past, Bud Grant had preferred to start training camp as late as possible and refrain from pushing his players too hard, reasoning that they'd be able to avoid injuries and conserve their stamina for the regular season and beyond. Well, smell you later, old man. There's a new sheriff in town. Steckel opens his training camp early in mid-July and has no tolerance for second guessing. In a combat situation, you could be in the middle of the river. You don't change your game plan. Thank you for your service, Les. He explains, I've led 210 Marines and 80 Vietnamese soldiers into combat, so don't talk to me about being a head coach. Wait a second. 210 Marines? Just months ago, you said you led 250 Marines. My God, Les, are your troops suffering casualties within the universe of your anecdote? If so, you need to stop using that line. Les, can I ask you something? Why do you use so many Marines analogies? Oh, because you were in the Marines. Wow, I didn't know that you were in the Marines. Thank you for your service, Les. This is all getting a little bit annoying, but wait, just wait. Les Steckel is about to win us all back over with the best, smartest idea in the history of organized football. He is going to put the Vikings through an Ironman competition. Bench presses, shuttle runs, a zigzag course, the whole deal. Where did you get this idea from, Les? Wow. Anyway, future Hall of Fame tight end Dave Casper takes one look and says, nope, I'm out. Bye, guys. Casper's in his 30s and has to protect himself from physical wear and tear. I mean, he's got a point, Les. There's not one football activity involved in this entire program. It seems pointless to put your guys through this and risk injury, but all right, you're the boss. You are the boss. See? What did I tell you? Literally 1/8 of your players are injured and the season hasn't even started yet. You've got pulled hammies all over the place. Your running back literally collapsed halfway through. What do you have to say for yourself? Oh, more Marine stuff. Thank you for your service, Les. It's not even August yet, and his players are already pretty over it. Running back Ricky Young says that Steckel likes to use the phrase, we lost a soldier, whenever a player gets injured. Meanwhile, Steckel thinks all this is going just great. Now he's holding an intra-squad scrimmage and the players will choose teams by holding a draft. Quote, we're having a draft so the players appreciate the importance of a draft to a football team. What? Two things, Les. First, the players don't work in the front office, so they do not need to practice drafting. Second, what player anywhere in America needs to be taught how important the draft is? Anyway, about that stupid-ass obstacle course, Steckel is now declaring that players are going to have to run that thing once a week during the regular season. My experience in the Marine Corps taught me a lot about blah 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 blah. I miss Bud Grant so much. Oh well, at least there are no outside distractions except for the film crew that's going to bumble all over camp at Steckel's invitation to cut a Marines recruiting video. Oh good, practice is over. This practice is secured, Steckel yells through a bullhorn. During yet another one of the newspaper profiles, Steckel seems to be enjoying a little bit too much. I talk in terms of the objective, or this mission. Les, listen, man, you are driving me up a wall. You are driving everybody up a wall with this bullshit. Like many Americans, I have had a good number of military people in my life, some of whom were in the Marines, some of whom saw combat, and you know how much they talk about it? Once in a while. Not that much. Look, Bud Grant was in the military, and in his entire autobiography, he spends like 1 page talking about it. He really doesn't bring it up all that much. In fact, Les, you've probably said more about the Marines in the last couple of months than Bud has ever said about everything combined. Before this gets any worse, can someone in Les Steckel's life please tell him to knock it off? Thank you, Chris Steckel. In October, Les Steckel's wife finally pulls him aside and tells him that he should really stop talking about the Marines. Steckel promises that he will. 2 days later, during a Q&A, wow, this reminds me of the Marines. Guys, hey, can we please just fire Les Steckel? Why? I don't know, just being really annoying. Alright, no, I understand. It's only his first year. It'd be really embarrassing for him and the entire organization to follow up a Bud Grant era with a guy who gets fired after just 1 year. I get it. In November, Steckel orders surprise urine tests for some of his players to see whether any of them piss hot for some drug or another. This is a totally brazen violation of the collective bargaining agreement, but Steckel doesn't really seem to care. He's ordering these tests because of things he saw in the Marines. Okay, now can we fire? Thank you. Goodbye, Les Steckel. We've truly lost a soldier today. Thank you for your service. In the aftermath of his firing, even more fun stories begin to trickle out, including this. Reportedly, while trying to fire up his players before a game, Les Steckel attempted to demonstrate a lesson in toughness by literally punching himself in the face. All this was pretty embarrassing, but the 1984 Vikings did at least remain competitive on the field. Right?
Afraid not, John. After going 16 years without a single season losing more games than they win, the Vikings in year one of the post-Grant era lose over 4 times as many games as they win, with Steckel captaining a 3-13 ship. The whole point of promoting Steckel to head coach was to foster stability and continuity within the coaching staff, to maintain a tried-and-true winning culture that had been established under Bud Grant's reign. Owner Max Winter cited it. Grant cited it, Steckel himself cited it, and he meant it, for about 3 weeks. That's when he decided to demote Bob Hallway, whom Grant had brought back 6 years ago for a second stint coordinating his defense, to an entry-level caliber position. Despite his lengthy track record of success in Minnesota, Steckel considered him a liability due to his age. They were gonna sink under Les Steckel, torpedoes be damned, with Hallway's deposition hammering the point home. For a good portion of the year, they do camouflage themselves well enough to resemble an actual NFL team. Even though they lose 7 of their first 10 games for the first time in the Super Bowl era, by NFL standards, 10 weeks into the season, they're just a regular bad team. Then, thanks to Steckel's extended military training camp, they fall completely off a cliff in becoming a spectacularly bad team. Defensively, they crumble without Hallway. Offensively, Steckel decides to appoint himself de facto coordinator this season, in the process alienating Grant's other top longtime lieutenant, Jerry Burns. After being used to operating with full autonomy on that side of the ball, Burns even has play-calling duties yanked away by Steckel, who is commandeering his entire previous domain. An exasperated Burns can take it no longer, throws up his hands, and checks out with the Vikings, submitting a resignation letter ahead of their Week 11 game against the Packers. So much for promoting Steckel under the idea he'd nurture a stable environment. Minnesota then immediately gets thrashed in Milwaukee and in each of their ensuing and final 5 games by an average of 4 touchdowns apiece, outscored by 162 points in that sextet of doom. Not only is no other team in their solar system over the same final 38% of this season, but even throughout the entire Super Bowl era, no non-expansion team can hold a candle to what the '84 Vikings are able to accomplish down the stretch. For the season as a whole, they finish up at minus 208. By point differential, Les Steckel's squad is by far the worst team through more than 60 years of Vikings existence. In a league where you play football, that's what happens when you go from annually preparing and training to, play football, to all of a sudden preparing and training for military combat. Ah, charts of badness. That hit the spot. We hadn't been able to make any of them yet for you, Vikes, but you can only keep us from that siren song for so long. Thank you for your service, Les.
On paper, this might look like the worst head coaching tenure in NFL history. That award goes to Urban Meyer, I think, and it's not even close, for a couple of reasons. One is that Steckel was able to recover from this to assemble a long, impressive career as an assistant coach on multiple Super Bowl teams. The other is that, despite nothing working out here, Steckel genuinely respected and believed in his players, and when he left, many of his players expressed mutual respect for him as a person. Good guy, failed experiment. But it really throws the greatness of the... by the way, this is the 49ers' second Super Bowl win. Congratulations to them. Anyway, it really throws the greatness of the previous coach into sharp relief, doesn't it? Faced with the frightening prospect of falling from the NFL's upper echelon once and for all, the Vikings management does the only reasonable thing. They pick up the phone and say, Bud? Bud unconditionally supported Steckel in the media, and even when meeting with Mike Lynn privately, he was hesitant to influence the decision one way or the other. He knew he held a massive amount of influence, but he had little interest in exercising it, feeling like it wasn't really his place to do so anymore. Still, it was clear that Bud's preferred successor was Jerry Burns, but whenever he said so, Lynn countered with, yeah, okay, but what about Les Steckel? Mike Lynn obviously already knew who he wanted and was just looking for Bud to say the magic words. Decades removed from the situation, Grant will feel comfortable acknowledging that the Steckel hire was a catastrophe, so much so that before the season was even over, Lynn begged Grant to step back in. Absolutely not, he said. I'm not going to do that to Steckel. So then Lynn made things less complicated. He's fired Steckel, and now he's begging Bud Grant, the only good coach the Minnesota Vikings have ever had, to strap back in. It's a lot to ask. Bud is having the time of his life in retirement. When he's not enjoying time with his family, he's out hunting with his dogs and making friends with birds. Remember, Bud's agnostic. He doesn't believe in paradise after death. This is his heaven. But he still loves his Vikings, and he can't bear to see what's happened to him. Fine, he says. Fine. But next time, when I leave and it's time to choose my successor, you have to listen to me.
Well, with the dawn of a second Bud Grant era, that resurrects Bob Hallway's status in the Vikings organization, and one of Bud's first orders of business upon taking over once again is reinstalling him as defensive coordinator. Immediately, the difference is night and day as the 85 Vikings allow nearly 8 fewer points per game than in 84. To coordinate his offense, Bud looks around, determined to land the very best option, and against all odds, somehow manages to. The old band is once again back together. The colossal upgrade of the Vikings coaching staff spearheads a remarkable turnaround from the jump. Minnesota opens the season by scoring 2 touchdowns in the final 3 minutes to beat the defending 18-1 Super Bowl champion 49ers, one of the teams that beat the snot out of the Vikes down the stretch last season. Later in the year, there's more late-game magic in Philly, where they find themselves down 4 scores with 8.5 minutes left, and somehow come back to win. After 14 weeks, they sit at 7-7 with 2 games to play, very much alive and kicking for a playoff spot. Game 15 is in Atlanta against a pretty wretched 2-12 Falcons squad. The Vikings are down 7 late, but score a touchdown midway through the fourth quarter to make the score 14-13 and pull within an extra point of time. To do so, they rely on this guy, Jan Stenerud. He'll go on to become the first pure place kicker enshrined in the Hall of Fame, and he's hit 133 of his last 135 PATs. But this one he pushes wide right, 14-13 remains the final score, and the Vikings' Super Bowl dreams are dashed in the wake of an incredibly unlikely missed kick against the Falcons. After the season wraps up, Bud Grant, who considers his 1984 retirement to be a dream he can't even remember, steps away for good after returning for his 18th and final season patrolling the Viking sideline. The same factors that prompted his initial resignation 2 years ago also prompt this one. He's had his fill after spending over 60% of his life in pro sports and wants to do other things. The same other things. But on his way out the door, he does secure for retirement the corporate, buzzword-filled title of Executive Consultant in charge of Organizational Development, aka check cashing for blinking and breathing.
Congratulations to the Chicago Bears, winners of Super Bowl 20. This is their first Super Bowl win. It's finally time to introduce you to Uncle Bernsey. Jerry Burns, the 4th head coach of the Minnesota Vikings. I love this man, and so does everybody else. Bud has long been fond of the guy, ever since their days together in Winnipeg. It makes perfect sense, because Bud has always seemed drawn to personalities different from his, and Burns couldn't really be much more different. For one, Burns is abjectly terrified of virtually all forms of wildlife, a quality of particular interest to his players. One day in the 70s, while reviewing film, they slowly lowered a fake spider in front of his face, causing him to lose his shit so dramatically he knocked over the projector and broke it. Which was fine, because Burns himself loves a good prank. Actually, to call his greatest production a prank sorta diminishes it. It's true theater, really. During training camp before the 1988 season, Keith Millard, who's wound up in Minnesota after all in the wake of the USFL going bust, trades some sharp words in the locker room with assistant coach Monty Kiffin. Pretty soon, they're yelling. Millard's teammates had no idea these two had beef with one another, and they're stunned by what they're seeing. Eventually, Burns has to step in and separate him to keep things from coming to blows. The team tries to put it behind him. Later that day, they're stretching on the practice field when they hear some commotion. It's coming from the rooftop of a nearby 12-story building. Millard and Kiffin are up there, and once again, they're getting into it. This time it is getting physical, with the two pushing and shoving. Suddenly, Millard grabs Kiffin and throws him off the roof. August fools, it's not Monty Kiffin, it's a mannequin dressed in Kiffin's clothes and a toupee that busts into pieces after falling 12 stories to the ground. The whole thing was orchestrated by Burns, the fake argument, the mannequin, the entire operation. He'd been sitting on this one for an entire year, and he couldn't be happier with the results. What are we supposed to do, practice football? Football sucks. It was a rare turn of perfectionism from Jerry Burns, who tended not to sweat the details. At all. In his book, in fact, Fran Tarkenton said that Burns would often have trouble remembering his players' names and arrived at the elegant solution of simply calling everybody Big Nuts. Burns would even somehow forget Tarkenton's name, simply calling him Number 10, which is not to say that his vocabulary isn't staggering. The amount of profanity Burns can compress into every single thing he says is truly heroic. This is a very bold claim that I am absolutely prepared to defend. Jerry Burns is the most profane head coach in NFL history, above Jerry Glanville or Jim Mora or Buddy Ryan or anybody else you want to name. Newspaper editors who print his comments often have to censor him more than they punctuate. Moreover, the cussing is just so much more satisfying coming from this guy. Jerry Burns is a fundamentally comical figure. It's rare to see him actually angry. He's mastered the art of being funny mad, a guy who will drop a dozen F-bombs and then crack a joke. And he always finds a way to look messy. His hair all mussed up, his weathered face poking out of a hoodie he looks like he slept in the night before. He probably isn't all that short, but compared to the football players he's always standing next to, he looks like an elf who just pulled a double shift at the cuss word factory. Congratulations to the New York Giants, winners of Super Bowl 21. This is their first Super Bowl win, and it's a pretty impressive rebound considering they were the second worst team of the Super Bowl era as recently as a couple of years ago. Teams from all up and down the chart are really starting to win this thing, but look at this drop-off between the Vikings and Giants. Remember, each of those grid lines represents 10 wins or losses. Minnesota's won about 100 more games over the last 21 seasons. That's almost 5 wins per season. You gotta figure the number is coming up soon, especially under Burnsy, who, on top of everything, is also a really good coach.
While Bud had pulled Minnesota from the depths of their 1984 hell, they don't miss a beat upon the transition to Burns, under whom they continue ascending. The 86 Vikings post a winning record at 9-7, and their underlying metrics paint an even more impressive picture. They're the NFL's only team to finish top 5 in both scoring offense and defense, yet they're somehow frozen completely out of the playoffs. They finished the season scoring 125 points more than they allowed, a point differential that's nearly good for second in the entire league and would have been the very best in their conference were they in the AFC. To miss the postseason with that kind of resume is quite rare and unlucky, but playoff berth or not, this is now an upper echelon team just about any way you slice it, only 2 years removed from hitting rock bottom. Heading into 1987, they are determined to play just a little better to ensure next time their season won't end after the regular season. But in year 2 of the Burns era, they don't quite reach the same heights as they did in year 1. In a strike-shortened season where their replacement team does them no favors, their record stagnates at 8-7. And unlike the prior year, their point differential appropriately reflects that, having scored just 1 point more than they allowed. Yet in an ironic twist of fate, this time they do punch their ticket to the postseason dance. They open in New Orleans against a Saints club marching in on a 9-game winning streak that produced their first ever winning record after 21 years. But despite being one of just 2 teams in the league to win at least 12 games, in their first ever playoff game, the 8-win Vikings absolutely pulverized them into dust, earning them a trip to San Francisco to face the other club to win at least a dozen games. A 13-2 Niners squad that is very much on notice. The Saints were one thing, but now they're playing on a short week against, off a bye week, the NFC's top seed whose quarterback is first-team All-Pro and 2-time Super Bowl MVP Joe Montana. But that isn't the only reason the Vikes are a double-digit underdog who nobody gives a snowball's chance in hell to win. Tommy Kramer, after an injury-marred regular season where he was unable to finish any of his 5 starts amid significant nerve issues in his neck that compromised his arm, was re-injured on the very first snap against the Saints. He's unable to go, so backup Wade Wilson, who himself is dealing with a concussion from the Saints game, gets his 8th starting assignment of the season. On the very first drive of that one, he moves them all the way down to San Francisco's 3-yard line, and even though they only come away with a field goal, that's a pretty big accomplishment as it represents the first point scored on the Niner D in 4 games. And tied at 3 early in the second quarter, Wilson surprisingly leads the game's first touchdown drive when tight end Carl Hilton takes his 3rd career catch in for his 3rd career score. Their defense holds strong to force a 3 and out, and the offense is on the verge of one of their own on 3rd and 10 when Kramer lofts the ball to his favorite target, Anthony Carter.
The arrival of a guy like Anthony Carter is another outcome of that optimization we were talking about. A key trait of any sport as it reaches a higher stage in its evolution, basketball, mixed martial arts, whatever, is the combination of skill sets. The best players no longer do just one thing well, they adopt skills from a variety of disciplines to become the Swiss Army knife type player scouts rave about. We saw it in Fran Tarkenton, who became the best quarterback in football by virtue of his ability to buy time with his legs to do damage with his arm. Now we're seeing that with Carter. Ever since his high school days, everyone in football has been well aware of his ability to single-handedly change any offense he's a part of. He's an elite receiver who possesses the hands and top speed of an elite receiver, but he combines this with the shiftiness and untouchability of an elite running back. In other words, Carter has built himself a flying car. In 1979, as a freshman at Michigan, he gave everybody in America a test drive, authoring one of the most celebrated plays in Wolverines history. Michigan's offense was marooned at midfield with 6 seconds remaining, needing a touchdown to win. This is typically when you roll the dice and chuck a desperate Hail Mary to the end zone unless you have Anthony Carter, in which case you can throw it into zone coverage and let him do his thing. Here he shows the route running in hands, cutting inside and catching on the run. Here's the elusiveness as he catches multiple Indiana defenders flat-footed. Here's the nimble footwork he uses to stay on his feet when falling down would mean losing the game. And finally, he throws on the Jets, the calling card of every great receiver. Ann Arbor goes nuts, because again, in this era, people are starting to see stuff they have never seen before. Carter entered the USFL after college, and after they went out of business, he eventually found his way to the Vikings, and here, in 1987, he's in the middle of one of the most dominant individual postseasons any player has ever had to the present day. His 642 all-purpose yards, in other words, combined yardage from rushing, receiving, kick returns, and punt returns, still stand as an all-time NFL record entering the 2023 season. The previous record holder was Washington's John Riggins, who stomped all over Minnesota in 1982. Ever since, they've wanted somebody who can change a game in that way. Now they've got him.
Carter's carried his team on both scoring drives so far, having already caught 5 passes just 17 minutes into the game. However, on this one, he's perfectly covered. Cornerback Don Griffin couldn't be better positioned to pick off the pass, but it bounces off his hands and right into Carter's, whose 63-yard pickup boosts him up to 125 receiving yards before the game's a third over. Just like they drew it up, the Vikings now find themselves in the red zone, where a field goal puts them up 10. Not 1 minute later, Montana uncharacteristically makes an ill-advised pass that's jumped by rookie Reggie Rutland, whose pick 6 knocks the Niners on the ropes, 20-3. With under 4 minutes left in the first half, the Niners, who haven't gotten a first down in any of their last 3 drives, face a 3rd and 7, which is a fantastic time to introduce the lone silver lining that emerged from the Steckel debacle, earning a top 3 pick in the 85 draft, and, after some maneuvering, selecting legendary pass rusher Chris Dolman 4th overall. Initially, Dolman played off the ball as an outside linebacker where his impact was minimal and he was still searching for his first career full sack toward the tail end of his second season. Then with 4 games left in 1986, he was begrudgingly moved to defensive end when they were banged up there, which was actually where Bud Grant always envisioned him ultimately settling anyway. Frustrated by transitioning from his beloved spot at linebacker, in his very first game at D-end, he nevertheless recorded his first career full sack, complete with a strip, against Bucs quarterback Steve Young. His first on a journey toward becoming, to this day, one of just 5 players to officially reach 150 career sacks. In the ensuing offseason, Burns got him to buy into the move full-time, and now he's flourishing as a full-time defensive end, not wanting to ever look back. And you can see why here, as his inside move puts the overmatched left side of San Francisco's O-line on skates to corral Montana and kill the 4th consecutive Niner drive without moving the chains. The Vikes take that shocking 20-3 lead into the locker room at the half, and on the first play of the third quarter, whoop, there goes Dolman again with another powerful inside move to split the tackle and guard and continue ruining Montana's day. Still unable to score a touchdown on offense, the Niner defense steps up to the plate and does so themselves with a pick six of Wade Wilson to get right back in it. But they still have a problem that is not going away. Anthony Carter. He gets the ball on Minnesota's first 2 plays on their next possession, a reception and a reverse that gained 46 yards to set up a 5-yard Hassan Jones touchdown. With the Niners offense still stuck in neutral under Montana, San Francisco coach Bill Walsh does the seemingly unthinkable. He benches his super-duper star franchise quarterback. Except the team's recent performance with his backup under center makes it a bit less unthinkable. That backup is none other than Chris Dolman's first career sack victim, Steve Young. The 17-point lead helps, but what doesn't is Young's arm completing a 31-yard pass on his first play, and shortly thereafter his legs running into the end zone. Though again, Minnesota's got Carter. Next Vikings snap, perfect coverage once more simply doesn't matter against this guy, whose leaping 40-yard grab leads to another field goal. At this point, the only drama remaining is whether or not he can break Tom Fears' near 40-year-old record of 198 receiving yards in a playoff game. In the closing minutes, sitting at 192, he obliterates it on an out-and-up where he again overcomes sticky coverage to haul in a 35-yard pass. Not only does he put together this performance with a man on the opposite sideline who averaged nearly 2 receiving touchdowns per game in the regular season, but Minnesota's defense shuts down the greatest to ever do it to the point that he's rendered the game's second leading receiver named Rice. An impossible combination to result in a loss. So with the Vikes going on to win 36-24 in a game that wasn't even that close, they become, and to this day remain, the only double-digit underdog since the AFL-NFL merger to ever win a playoff game by double digits. Piggybacking off their 34-point win over the 12-3 Saints, they won back-to-back playoff road games by a combined 46 points against the NFL's top 2 regular season teams who won a combined 25-5. That's a likely frontrunner for the most impressive resume of back-to-back playoff wins in NFL history. And those January beatdowns were accomplished by a team that not only in the regular season won just 1 more game than they lost and scored just 1 more point than they allowed, but also occurred amid significant injuries to both of their top 2 quarterbacks, the most vital position in sports. Now they pack their bags for DC. 60 minutes from a berth in Super Bowl 22. Wilson remains the starter for the NFC Championship game, and it's not long before he's fighting an uphill battle when Washington's Doug Williams tosses a long touchdown on their first drive of the game. The Vikings tie it up in the second on Leo Lewis's over-the-shoulder grab, which represents the first points scored by the road team in the NFC title game in 4 years. And Minnesota's defense has clamped down after allowing that early touchdown. Early in the fourth quarter, they've only allowed 20 yards across Williams' ensuing 20 passes, with Washington tacking on just 3 more points. In a defensive slugfest, that's 3 more than the Vikes have put up since their touchdown, but trailing 10-7, they're on the verge of moving in front as they've reached Washington's 3-yard line for first and goal. A 2-yard gain sets up a second and goal from the 1, and a run off left tackle is stuffed for no gain to bring up third and goal from the 1. DJ Dozier tries to soar over the top for the touchdown, and just as he's about to score, linebacker Neil Olkowitz blindly reaches up and is able to get just enough of Dozier's foot to keep him out and bring up a 4th down within a foot of the goal line. Burns opts to settle for a field goal to tie the game at 10, at which point Williams and All-Pro wideout Gary Clark spark a revival of Washington's aerial attack. Their next pass comes on a 3rd down rollout where the two connect deep downfield for a 43-yard gain. The one after that results in Williams threading the needle to Clark, who snags the go-ahead touchdown with 5 minutes to play in regulation. Down 7, Wilson leads the Vikes 61 yards downfield, where they find themselves facing a 2nd and 4 just 6 yards away from likely sending a game between these two teams to overtime for the 2nd time in 4 weeks and 3rd time in 14 months. 2 incompletions bring up a do-or-die 4th down with less than a minute left, and because of Washington's goal line stand on their last drive, kicking's not an option for Minnesota. They need to convert right here or their season is over. Offensive coordinator Bob Schnelker dials up Smoke 83 option, which gives running back Darren Nelson the option to break his route inside or outside, depending on how the defense plays him. Nelson chooses the latter. Wilson delivers an accurate ball that hits Nelson in the chest, but he bobbles it before a hit from corner Darrell Green prevents any second effort to secure the ball, and the Vikings' Cinderella playoff run comes to an excruciating end.
Congratulations to Washington, winners of Super Bowl 22. This is their 2nd Super Bowl win, and it was delivered in large part by quarterback Doug Williams, who authored a knockout performance for the ages with 340 yards and 4 touchdowns. In him, they had a quarterback they could rely upon as the guy. That's what you need to win now. In the early 70s, Bud Grant had for a time believed that a properly built team could win a Super Bowl regardless of who was taking the snaps. In that era, you could at least understand why he might have thought so. In this era, and all eras to follow, it's completely untenable. Not only are the 80s the decade of the quarterback, they'll establish once and for all that football is the sport of the quarterback. Whether it's the Niners with Joe Montana, the Giants with Phil Simms, the Broncos with John Elway, the ascendant franchises depend on elite franchise quarterbacks. Even the '85 Bears, who were outstanding in every phase of the game, needed Jim McMahon behind center. The Vikings don't have a guy like these. There is no the guy. They have 3 guys. One, of course, is Tommy Kramer, who's been the de facto franchise guy ever since Tarkenton retired, but has had a really hard time staying healthy. Standing in for him, as we just saw, is Wade Wilson, who's written a hell of a success story for himself. Drafted in the 8th round out of a small school, he had all the makings of a career clipboard holder, but as Kramer got dinged up, Wilson started to find more opportunities. He wasn't slowed by a diabetes diagnosis, which he initially feared would end his career. By 1988, advanced metrics indicate that Wilson has become the better passer. This season, the Vikings finished 11-5, their best record in more than a decade, despite Jerry Burns waffling over who starts under center. It was Wilson at first, but after a subpar performance in Week 1, the reins were handed back to Kramer. Burns then yanked Kramer in the middle of a poor Week 7 performance. Wilson was the guy after all, or so it seemed. Down the stretch, the Wade Wilson Vikings start beating the hell out of everybody. The defense clamps down, and across weeks 11 through 14, they collectively outscore their opponents 123 points to 9, a margin of more than 100. This actually goes down in history as one of the most dominant 4-game stretches of the Super Bowl era, and by the end of it, Wilson is confident enough to say what Vikings fans want to hear. This is a Super Bowl team. But in Week 16, with a playoff berth already in the bag, and with Wilson, the recently named Pro Bowler, having a pretty decent game, Burns puts him on the bench and sends in Kramer out of nowhere. The Vikings ultimately do squeak out the win, but Wilson's confidence is rattled. As much as we love Jerry Burns, this is just no way to operate an offense. A quarterback has to play with confidence, and it's tough to do that when you know the Shepherd's King can come for you at any minute. This has been going on for quite a while, and it's been made even more disorienting by the presence of guy number 3, Rich Gannon. It's certainly not Gannon's fault that Mike Lynn proclaimed him to be the quarterback of the future, but this is a great recipe for ensuring that none of these 3 guys really know exactly where they stand. As they host the Rams in the opening round of the playoffs, Wade Wilson has apparently decided to introduce some clarity to the situation. On his opening series, he uncorks one to Jim Gustafson, displaying the sort of deep ball that Kramer is a little less inclined to throw at this point in his career. It leads to a touchdown and sets the tone for the rest of the afternoon. The Vikings force costly turnovers on defense and keep on rolling on offense en route to a 28-17 win over a very formidable Rams squad. Up next is a rematch against the Niners, who they beat last year in the same round by hanging 36 points on them. A year later, these Vikings are even stronger. Everybody's talking Super Bowl. Former players are talking about it. Area stores are already ordering t-shirts. They're literally minting Vikings Super Bowl commemorative coins. Minnesota busts right out of the gate with an opening drive that nets them 3 points. San Fran responds with a, shit. Congratulations to the San Francisco 49ers, winners of Super Bowl 23. This is their third Super Bowl win. The Vikings of the late 1980s have bottled up the requisite energy for a Super Bowl run. They're clearly only missing one ingredient, but which one? You might look around the NFL and say they should address the quarterback position either by acquiring a new one or deciding on one of the three they've already got, but there's something different that sticks in their craw. Of the many, many bad things that happened to them throughout this 34-9 loss to the Niners, the memory they were sent home with was a run from one Roger Craig. We've searched StatHead, which allows searches between 1994 and 2022 for plays that resemble this one. At or inside the 20, fourth quarter, with the offense already up by 3 scores. In this situation, everyone in the building knows exactly what time it is. You run it. And because the defense is expecting a run, busting loose for a touchdown is astronomically rare in this circumstance. In that span of nearly 30 years, we've only seen it happen 3 times. Roger Craig pulled off this once-in-a-decade occurrence by effortlessly slipping one tackle and throwing off the afterburners. They can't have Roger Craig, not yet anyway, but this is the explosiveness that the Vikings want from the running back position. Mike Lynn has come to believe that a stud back is what separates the Super Bowl contenders from all the rest. He and the Vikings are on the crest of the wave, and they are desperate to make good on it. It's now been 12 seasons since their last Super Bowl appearance. An unthinkably long drought for a team as proud as this one, a franchise that played in 4 of the first 11 Super Bowls. They have to make a move, and they have to make it now. 5 weeks into the 1989 season, sitting on the precipice with a 3-2 record, Mike Lynn pulls the trigger and orchestrates the most historically significant trade in all of NFL history.
The biggest star on the Dallas Cowboys is a running back who jumped from the USFL's New Jersey Generals to America's team in 1986 after being let out of his contract by owner Donald Trump. From the very outset of his career, he's proven to be a dynamic weapon cut from a similar cloth as Craig with remarkable versatility. He was the first player in league history to top 700 rushing and receiving yards in each of his first 2 seasons, leading the league in yards from scrimmage in the latter campaign of 1987. Last year in '88, he continued ascending, cementing his place among the league's top tier of playmakers. But the Cowboys are terrible, and as coach Jimmy Johnson is still searching for his first career win, he's willing to use his lone blue-chip player to kickstart a rebuild, especially since he's unhappy in Johnson's offense. The Minnesota Vikings are circling. They have identified their target. This is their guy, and they will not take no for an answer. First, they have to convince the player to be willing to join the team, as he holds all the cards due to concerns he'll simply retire if he gets shipped off someplace he doesn't want to be. And when Lynn meets with him and his wife to persuade them to embrace Minnesota, it's a tough sell, but with the eventual assistance of a 7-figure check cut by Cowboys owner Jerry Jones to accept a trade, that box does ultimately get checked. Step 2 in pulling off the ultimate all-in move is compiling a massive enough compensation package to satisfy Johnson. In order to pry their Lone Star loose from the Lone Star State, Lynn's determined to make Johnson an offer that he can't possibly refuse. While he dangles a handful of reliable contributors, the real value of the offer is in the draft capital accompanying them. Lynn stacks first-round pick on top of first-round pick on top of first-round pick on top of second-round pick on top of second-round pick on top of second-round pick and more until even Vito Corleone's like, whoa dude, you sure about this?
Herschel Walker will be many things in his life. Heisman Trophy winner, Winter Olympian, MMA fighter who racks up wins against a couple of tomato cans they line up for him, senatorial candidate who narrowly loses his election after flip-flopping from saying he wants to be a vampire to saying he wants to be a werewolf. In 1989, Walker is one of the most physically gifted athletes alive. He's certainly a top-tier running back, having rushed for more than 1,500 yards last season, and what makes him particularly interesting is that he did this with a terrible team. There's a very strong correlation between 1,500-yard rushers and excellent football teams. Granted, there's a chicken-egg effect here. The better you are as a team, the more often you lead ball games, and the more likely you are to hand your guy the ball. Still, Walker, who led the NFC in rushing for a 3-13 team, stands out here. Only Jamal Charles in 2012 will do more for a worse team. So if you're Mike Lynn, you see in Herschel Walker a guy whose abilities are going to waste. A guy who can nudge you up the mountain from perennial playoff contender to Super Bowl champion. And Lynn says so in the most explicit possible terms. They are acquiring Herschel Walker for the purpose of winning the Super Bowl. Also important is the particular team they're dealing with here. The Dallas Cowboys, who have battled neck and neck with the Raiders for the title of winningest team of the Super Bowl era, are at long last regressing to the mean. The satisfaction of pillaging these Cowboys for talent might not factor into Lynn's calculations, but if I'm a Viking fan, it sure as hell factors into mine. They've sent us home in the playoffs 3 times, more than any other team. 2 of those times, they stepped over us on their way to a Super Bowl victory. The other time, they fraudulently stole a win from us, thanks to an uncalled penalty on the villainous Drew Pearson. Now, at last, it's our time. Meanwhile, you Cowboys will finish a humiliating 1-15 this season. Eat shit. We are the future.
Walker's traded to Minnesota on a Thursday, a few days after wrapping up his Cowboys career with a loss in Green Bay. Just 3 days after that, he gets a mulligan against the Packers as he suits up for the Vikes after a grand total of 2 practices with his new team. Jerry Burns intends to use him sparingly, and following a Green Bay touchdown, his first time on the field is to return his first kickoff in 6 years. Fielding the kick 4 yards deep in his own end zone, Walker brings the ball out, a pretty big no-no for normal kick returners, but Walker immediately shows his new fan base that he is not normal as he races more than 50 yards before being pushed out of bounds. A penalty brings that one back, but on his very first play from scrimmage in purple, Walker explodes through the defense, picks up close to 30 yards, loses a shoe, and picks up another 20 yards. And with that, Burns' game plan goes up in flames. Fed another 17 carries, Walker dazzles the raucous Metrodome crowd all afternoon in a rollicking win. He finishes up his spectacular debut with 148 rushing yards, a number good for the second most by a Viking in the decade, and also about twice the amount of hours he's been a part of the club. The entire organization and its fans are buzzing with excitement right about now over the controversial blockbuster trade that had many initially apprehensive. Mike Lynn's sure as hell feeling pretty good about himself right about now. For a point of comparison, Lynn's gone as far as invoking the Oakland A's recent trade for Ricky Henderson and his performance in the '89 ALCS that wrapped up a few days ago. Which, is about as hyperbolic as it gets. Let's not get carried away here, Mike. Because, you see, the 1989 Minnesota Vikings then proceed to play their 10 remaining games. As a team, they do well, going 6-4 to earn a division title, but that isn't exactly because of the Walker trade. They do so despite parting with the motherlode of draft assets to get the presumed one missing piece to a Lombardi trophy. After more yards from scrimmage across the previous 2 seasons than any other NFL player, 35 have more over the final 63% of the '89 season. When playoffs are included, Walker closes his season with 9 straight games where he was unable to even approach league average rushing efficiency. Over a half season's worth of play from the guy for whom you've sold your soul to the devil not being able to put forth even an average performance. When Homer made his deal with Satan, at least he got to eat the final bite of a donut.
Someone, it seems, must be blamed for this. Vikings fans, or to be more accurate, an extremely vocal minority of Vikings fans, have decided that offensive coordinator Bob Schnelker is that someone. They've been calling for his job for a while. Now the line is that Schnelker isn't calling enough plays for Walker and that the plays he is calling aren't doing the trick. Either these fans have forgotten who Bob Schnelker is or they simply don't care anymore. But in a time long, long ago, he was a receiver. And although he was only on the Vikings roster for a short time, it was he who caught Fran Tarkenton's first ever touchdown pass and scored the first touchdown in Minnesota Vikings history. The one that started it all. But desperation leads you to some very strange places. These Vikings fans need a Super Bowl like they need oxygen. They've suffered more than 10 years without one. And if turning on one of their own is what it takes, that's what they'll do. It would be one thing to simply criticize his play calling, but it's quite another to hand out anti-Schnelker propaganda outside the Metrodome and erupt into a chorus of boos when his photo is shown on the big screen. When we boo, we do so without an ounce of guilt, confident in the reasoning that being booed is part of their job. It hurts, to a degree you and I will never understand because neither you nor I have been booed by 60,000 people while trying to make them happy. This, in particular, is what sets off Jerry Burns and what ignites the greatest press conference in NFL history. You may have seen segments on NFL Network or SportsCenter that count down the supposed greatest ever coach meltdowns. This one is often conspicuously missing. I can't really blame him though, because this is not exactly the easiest thing to put on television. At this point, I'd like to recommend that if you have small children in the room, make sure they pay very close attention to what we're about to hear. They're going to learn some new words. It's going to be great. What we have for you is a vocabulary of 255 different words or variants of words, all of which Jerry Burns will use within this 688-word segment of his November 5th post-game press conference, for which we have video evidence. Start the count. Jerry Burns kicks things off by sort of heating up the engines, talking about the game he just coached. As you'd guess, the most often used words so far are a and the, although he does get a couple of hells in there, as well as a shit. Now, we know how much Jerry loves cussing, but what we're about to hear is not for fun. He's gonna build a platform with the attention he'll get in newspapers from coast to coast. And he's gonna use that platform to let everybody know they need to back off from his guy, Bob Schnelker. Here is when he gets to work.
Let me say something. As long as I'm in this fucking job, Schnelker will be the offensive coach. I mean, no question fucking about that. No fucking question about that. Now, I don't like to name names after a fucking game, but we can't be responsible for the blocking. We can't be responsible for the fucking guys jumping offside. We can't be responsible for
That was Jerry's seventh fuck in a 46-second span. This currently puts him at 9.13 fucks per minute. As far as we can tell, the most fuck-heavy piece of mainstream American film as of 1989 is Eddie Murphy's 1987 stand-up performance, Eddie Murphy Raw, which shocked and horrified reviewers all over the country. That registered at 2.48 fucks per minute, so Jerry has already thrown himself into the great unknown. At this point, he does two things. He keeps his foot on the gas here, while also speaking on all the mistakes Schnelker does not deserve blame for.
We get down there, and it was a dumb play by Anderson. I love Anderson. But it was a dumb fucking play when his foot was, shoe was coming off, up the line of scrimmage. We were howling take time out. We had a fucking trap play called. And his fucking shoe comes off. That ain't Bob Schnelker's fault. We have another fucking trap play, and if Finney picks up his fucking feet, he walks in.
It's genius. Jerry knows how much fun reporters get out of printing his censored rants, so he's hanging his message on these fucks, knowing his defense of Schnelker will make it to print right alongside him. By this point, he's approaching 11 fucks per minute, giving him the luxury of coasting for a bit. Over the next couple minutes, he throws a couple more fucks on the fire, but is happy to let his metrics burn off considerably. He even allows for a little bit of clean comedy.
I think we did, yeah.
That right there is another distinct difference between this presser and any of those others. The Vikings just won a game. Jerry is delivering this immediately after a win. As he continues, his fucks per minute ratio falls to around 4. He's not quite so angry now because the conversation has turned to a memory near and dear to his heart.
This game reminds me of a Cleveland Brown game when we went down to the old Met Center. We hit Ahmad on a squadron right, put it in, and won the division.
You might recognize what he's talking about. The miracle at the Met. The final relic of the good times. I don't think it's any accident that Jerry returns to it now. Just a few years after Bud Grant's departure, you'd hardly know he was ever here. Bud's steadiness and quiet confidence is nowhere to be seen anymore. Only institutional panic. A pawning off of their future for the sake of one player they hope will be their savior. Fans desperately singling out a coach to shriek at. Even Jerry, of course, is in the middle of a sermon Bud never would have delivered in a million years. But Jerry's still the last link to those good times, those Super Bowls, that miracle at the Met. He misses those days. But back in the cruel and unfamiliar present, Jerry still has business to finish. He needs those fans to hear how fucking awful they're being to Bob Schnelker.
The guy feel like shit afterwards. What?
Or something that happened today?
Yeah, he felt like shit afterwards. Everybody booing the shit out of him, but he worked his ass off.
And how wrong they are about him.
And no smarter coordinator in football.
As loath as we are to cite Wikipedia as a source, it's about the best we can do in this case. Excluding a few outlying shock humor flicks, these appear to be the most fuck-heavy mainstream American films in terms of fucks per minute. If you consider this footage a film, as I prefer to, Jerry will claim the belt for 13 years until the 2002 release of the Jay-Z vehicle's state property. If he can throw just one more in there, he can claim an even greater piece of history.
Fuck, they put his picture up there and the fuckers boo him.
2. He gave us 2.
Fuckers.
And that seals it. 3.89 fucks per minute. This is a work of profanity that will stand alone for 30 years until the 2019 release of the modern classic Uncut Gems. Although nothing about this sounded anything like Bud, I think Jerry took a page out of his old friend's playbook here. Remember the lead up to Super Bowl 8 when Bud broke character and lit Commissioner Rozelle on fire over his players' subpar accommodations? Remember how that was a calculated move on his part to draw attention to himself and keep the heat off his players? I believe that's what Jerry was up to here. He saw his coach being dragged through the mud and he did the only thing he could, the only way he knew how. It's a truly fucking magnificent work, crafted by a truly remarkable human being. Love you, Jerry. Bob Schnelker does indeed remain in the saddle. The 1989 Vikings hold on to win the NFC Central, thereby clinching a wild-card bye. In the divisional round, for the third consecutive year, they find the 49ers waiting for them. Minnesota won the first, San Fran won the second. The Vikings begin the rubber match exactly the same way they started the first two, by driving downfield and taking the early 3-0 lead. You can see Walker's touches highlighted here. While they're nothing to write home about, we can at least see Schnelker's interest in getting him the ball early and often. The Vikings also need to hoard points early and often because they know Jerry Rice is coming. A year ago, he lit him up for 3 touchdowns on just 5 receptions. Now the greatest receiver in the history of the sport is at it again, connecting with Montana for a 72-yard score. With both teams now on the board, the Vikings keep calling Walker's number. Touch number 6 from scrimmage is a run that goes for a short gain. Number 7 is a swing pass that goes for a little bit more. Number 8, he gets stripped up near the line. And on number 9, he's stuffed on a 3rd and short to force a Vikings punt. Here is touch number 10. Aside from a handful of kick returns, none of which were notable, Herschel Walker did not touch the ball in the second quarter, and he did not touch the ball in the third quarter. On several series, he didn't even take the field, not even a block. A considerable downside of placing all your eggs in the running game is that if you're down big, as the Vikings were after allowing 27 unanswered points to close out the first half, the running game can't really help you much. At quarterback, Wade Wilson was largely unable to move the ball, at one point throwing a disastrous first down pick near his own end zone. I'm hardly letting the cat out of the bag, I think, when I congratulate the San Francisco 49ers, winners of Super Bowl 24. This is their 4th Super Bowl win, and this is a team that no one will be able to slow down in any way. Not the Rams, who are going to get plastered 30-3 in the next round, and not the Broncos, who will suffer the most lopsided Super Bowl defeat of all time, 55-10. There was probably nothing Minnesota could have done against these 1989 49ers, one of the greatest teams in history. But Jerry Burns tries anyway. At halftime, he benches Wade Wilson, adding one last chapter to a quarterback controversy that's dragged on for years, and reaches for his quarterback of the past, Tommy Kramer. 2-Minute Tommy, as they once called him, mounts a field goal drive and does little else after that. Early in the fourth quarter, he throws a pick six to put this one in the bag for San Francisco. It's the final pass Kramer will ever throw in a Vikings uniform. Burns now does something that's never been done before or since in the NFL. He has 3 different quarterbacks attempt at least 15 passes in a single playoff game. Even stranger, none of them are injured. Burns is just shuffling in futility between the present to the past, now to the future, and Rich Gannon, who has never started an NFL game. Gannon has a terrific career ahead of him that'll eventually culminate in an MVP award. For now, it's his turn to throw an interception that's quickly cashed in for 6. And that is how we arrive at Herschel Walker touch number 10. With the Vikings down 41-6 with minutes to play, lurching toward a meaningless touchdown. Walker, the one for whom the Vikings gave up the moon and the stars and the future for games just like this one, will finish with 29 rushing yards today. His longest run will measure 6 yards. 3 of his teammates will be able to match or beat that, including 2 of his quarterbacks. A year from now, Terminator 2 will release in theaters. Its antagonist, the T-1000, is the Bud Grant Vikings. Icy, unbothered, unshakable, never quite in grasp of its target, but always within reach, always getting closer. These Vikings are the T-1000 in the vat of molten steel, manically transmuting into every creature they've ever been, everything that ever worked, every foe they've ever conquered, everything they've ever seen in anybody else. A frightening end of a golden age. January 6, 1990 is the day the Minnesota Vikings fall from the ranks of NFL royalty. This is how we know they have. If you are NFL royalty, you achieve greatness across multiple generations. Someone sees their greatness, and down the road, their child sees that same greatness. There are children in purple jerseys watching this afternoon whose parents saw Joe Kapp and Alan Page and Fran Tarkenton. They are watching an institution that no longer knows what it is, that reeks of insecurity. But their conquerors know. They're 2 conquerors who will dominate the decade to come. The Dallas Cowboys, who have now antagonized him twice, once by using him as a prop as they orchestrated arguably the most storied play in NFL history, and now by getting one over on him in what is widely regarded as the greatest fleecing in NFL history. And the San Francisco 49ers, who, for the 2nd straight year, have beaten him silly on the field en route to their 4th Lombardi Trophy. Both these conquerors have sent the Minnesota Vikings a message, one they will reinforce in the coming years, an unholy incantation that shatters the heart of every American. One more devastating than "we hate you" or "we will destroy you." It simply says, "You don't belong here."